I need you to understand something before we go any further. What I am watching unfold right now, in real time, not in a think tank simulation, not in a war game scenario played out by analysts at the Rand Corporation, but right now, today, is something I genuinely cannot believe I am watching. The military architecture that has defined global order for 80 years is visibly cracking. Not bending, not straining under pressure, cracking. The myth that the United States military is invincible. The myth that American protection is absolute. The myth that buying into the American security umbrella means safety, real, reliable, bankable safety. That myth is being dismantled in real time, in front of every government on Earth, every intelligence agency on Earth, every financial market on Earth. And almost nobody is talking about it correctly. I am going to walk you through exactly what is happening, why it matters not just for the Middle East, but for every alliance, every treaty, and every security guarantee that underwrites the modern world. Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Australia, Europe. All of it is connected to what is happening in the Persian Gulf right now. Subscribe to Daily Brief right now if you have not already. Hit the bell, because what I am about to show you will permanently change how you read the news, not just about this conflict, but about every conflict that follows it. Let's go.
Let me tell you what we know, what the data actually shows, not what Washington's official messaging wants you to believe. In the last 12 days, 12 consecutive days, Iran has conducted successive waves of drone strikes, cruise missile attacks, and unmanned naval vessel operations across multiple fronts simultaneously. Not a single front, not a one-time escalatory spike that subsided after a day or two. 12 days, multiple waves per day, sustained, coordinated, and relentless. And here is the fact that the Trump administration keeps glossing over in every briefing, every press conference, every carefully worded statement designed to project confidence. The frequency of attacks is not decreasing. According to the United Kingdom's Maritime Trade Operations Office, the UKMTO, the independent body that commercial shipping around the world relies on for threat assessments in exactly this region, the number of attacks on commercial shipping in the Persian Gulf and around the Strait of Hormuz has actually increased in the last 24 hours. Not decreased, increased. And yet the Trump administration continues to tell you that Iranian capabilities have been obliterated, that the mission is succeeding, that Gulf state allies have never been happier. Stop. That is not what the data shows, and the gap between the official narrative and the operational reality is the most important story in the world right now.
Let me take you back to where this started, because understanding how we got here is essential to understanding where we are going. Rewind to late February. The United States and Israel launched what is described internally as a coordinated campaign targeting Iran's military and nuclear infrastructure. Massive in scale. Tomahawk cruise missiles, F-35 stealth strike packages. Targets not just in Tehran, but across the entire country. Isfahan, Fordo, Natanz, Arak, Kermanshah. The full weight of the most sophisticated air power ever assembled in human history, directed at a single adversary in a single campaign. The American defense apparatus, leaning on 8 decades of uncontested air dominance, on the institutional memory of Desert Storm, of Kosovo, of the opening weeks of the Iraq War, anticipated one thing above all else: rapid degradation of Iranian response capability. The core premise that has underpinned American military thinking since 1991. Strike hard, strike fast, shock and awe. Watch the adversary's command and control collapse. That premise was wrong. Iran did not collapse. Iran did not pause. Iran did not need 48 hours to assess the damage and recalibrate. Iran responded within less than 60 minutes. According to open-source intelligence tracking platforms pulling from satellite imagery and maritime data, 17 American military installations across the Middle East received incoming fire in the first hour alone.
Not symbolic fire, not the kind of carefully choreographed face-saving volley that Iran launched after the killing of Qasem Soleimani in January 2020, when Iran effectively telegraphed its strikes in advance so that no Americans would be killed, preserving the option to de-escalate. That was theater. Both sides understood it as theater. This was not theater. Bases in Qatar, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Iraq, all targeted. U.S. personnel were forced to abandon forward operating bases and relocate to hotels, which then became secondary targets themselves. And it has not stopped. 12 days later, it has not stopped. Now I want to walk you through the first revelation, the one that restructures everything else. Pay close attention. The THAAD systems and Patriot batteries that the United States had pre-positioned across the Gulf, the crown jewels of American terminal air defense, the systems that were supposed to intercept and destroy incoming Iranian missiles and drones, have struggled. They have not collapsed entirely. They have conducted meaningful interception operations, but they have struggled. And the proof of that is not in Iranian propaganda. The proof is in American behavior. The United States has begun pulling terminal high-altitude air defense systems, THAAD batteries, out of South Korea and redeploying them to the Middle East.
South Korean state media has broadcast footage of these systems being physically loaded onto transport aircraft and flown away. South Korean lawmakers from across the political spectrum, left, right, and center, have gone on record expressing alarm. The systems that were positioned to protect South Korea from North Korean ballistic missiles are being shipped to the Gulf because the Gulf cannot be adequately defended without them. And while this is happening, while the THAAD systems are leaving the Korean peninsula, Kim Jong-un posted photos and videos on North Korean state media of himself personally overseeing the test launch of strategic cruise missiles from a new 5,000-ton naval destroyer. As reported by Yonhap news agency, citing South Korean defense officials, this is the first operational deployment of cruise missile capability from a vessel of that class in North Korean history. The timing, days after the THAAD withdrawal, is not a coincidence. It is a message, delivered publicly, with photographs, for every intelligence agency on Earth to see and interpret. That is what great power signaling looks like in the modern era, and the message is unmistakable. Now, let me explain the economic logic of what is happening, because this is not being reported clearly anywhere, and it is fundamental to understanding why this conflict cannot be resolved quickly through military means alone.
A THAAD interceptor missile costs approximately $37 million per round. A Patriot PAC-3 interceptor costs between $4 and $6 million per round. An Iranian Shahed-136 kamikaze drone costs an estimated $20,000 to $50,000 to manufacture. Read those numbers again and let the math land. The United States is spending between $4 million and $37 million to destroy a weapon that costs $20,000 to build. And Iran is almost certainly also deploying decoy drones, inert airframes with no warhead, designed purely to draw interception fire. If a $5 million missile destroys a $30,000 drone, that exchange ratio is painful. If it destroys a dummy drone with no warhead at all, it is catastrophic. This asymmetry is not sustainable at scale, not for weeks, not for months, not while Iran is manufacturing these systems at industrial volume with Russian and Chinese supply chain assistance. And the evidence strongly suggests that is exactly what is happening. Now pause on the deeper implication here. You are not just running down physical inventory, you are running down the political will to keep feeding hundreds of millions of dollars of munitions into a conflict with no visible endpoint. And you are doing it publicly, in front of every ally and adversary on the planet, with cameras rolling across the Gulf.
Every defense ministry in Asia, every military planner in Europe, every sovereign wealth fund manager in the Gulf, every intelligence director in every country that has structured its security around American power. All of them are watching. All of them are updating their calculations. And the number they are updating most fundamentally is this one. How long can America sustain this? 20% of the world's traded oil transits the Strait of Hormuz. 20%. That corridor, 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, is now effectively a contested battle space. Iranian unmanned surface vessels, armed naval drones operating on the water rather than in the air, have struck commercial shipping. In just the last 24 hours, 3 commercial vessels were hit in and around the strait. One incident deserves particular attention. A Malta-flagged vessel, Greek-owned, was alongside a Marshall Islands-flagged vessel, during a ship-to-ship transfer operation off the coast of Iraq. An Iranian unmanned surface vehicle struck with enough force to rupture both hulls and release a catastrophic quantity of oil into the Gulf. Independent maritime observers described it as the largest single-incident spill in the region in decades. The oil price is still rising.
That is the only data point you need to assess whether the market believes Washington's narrative that things are under control. Markets process information faster than any government press office. When Goldman Sachs issues a client advisory within 72 hours of the initial strikes, describing, in their own words, acute upside risk to crude pricing across all planning horizons, that is not pessimism. That is the most sophisticated risk assessment apparatus on Earth, telling you what it sees. The International Energy Agency held an emergency session. The United States and allied nations under the IEA framework have already begun drawing down strategic petroleum reserves at a rate not seen since the Gulf War era, and still the price is rising. Because the market is pricing in one specific scenario, that this conflict does not resolve quickly, that the strait does not reopen on a predictable timeline, that the structural supply disruption is not a short-term shock, but a medium-term reality that must be planned around. And then Iran's military spokesperson made the doctrine explicit, broadcast on Al Jazeera, confirmed across multiple regional news organizations. Not a single liter of oil will pass through the Strait of Hormuz if it benefits the United States, Israel, or their allies. That is not a threat. That is operational doctrine announced in public.
And the follow-on statement from senior Iranian military officials is more alarming still. If Washington makes what Iran terms a strategic mistake, a second strait will face conditions similar to Hormuz. The strait they mean is the Red Sea. The tool they mean is the Houthis, and the implication, confirmed by geopolitical risk analyst Patricia Marins, whose assessments have circulated widely in security and financial circles, is that weapons transfers from Iran to Yemen may already be underway to execute exactly that scenario. If the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea are both effectively closed simultaneously, the global energy and shipping system faces a disruption with no modern precedent. If you are watching this and thinking this is a regional Middle Eastern conflict with limited global implications, I need you to stop and recalibrate completely. Hit like if this is connecting for you. Drop a comment. Tell me, did you see this coming? I read every single one. We cover this not for clicks, but because you deserve to understand what is actually happening in the world. Now, the second revelation, and this is the one that nobody is connecting properly, the one with the longest and most consequential tail. The visible struggle of American air defense systems over the Gulf is being watched in real time by every Asian security partner the United States has.
Taiwan, South Korea, which just watched its THAAD systems get loaded onto transport aircraft and shipped away. Japan, Australia, the Philippines. Every single one of these countries has structured its defense posture around one foundational assumption: that American protection, when tested, is reliable. That when the chips are down and the missiles are incoming, the American security umbrella holds. That assumption is now empirically in question. Geopolitical risk analyst Patricia Marins wrote something that I want you to hear clearly. Up until February 28th, American protection felt absolute. Today, it feels like something else entirely. She is right, and the financial markets and the defense ministries agree with her. According to Reuters, Japan's Cabinet Office authorized an emergency review of its defense industrial base within days of the initial conflict developments. Australia's opposition defense spokesperson called for an emergency parliamentary briefing on AUKUS implementation timelines. South Korea's defense ministry issued a statement, notably restrained in diplomatic language, but notable precisely because of that restraint, affirming that it was reviewing all relevant contingency frameworks. That is diplomatic language for, we are alarmed and we are trying not to say so out loud. Think about what Japan's prime minister is calculating tonight.
Japan's entire post-war security architecture, the U.S.-Japan Mutual Defense Treaty, the 54,000 American troops stationed at bases across Japan, the carrier strike groups that rotate through the Pacific, all of it is underwritten by the assumption that America can and will project overwhelming force reliably when called upon. What have the last 12 days demonstrated? That a mid-tier regional power, not China, not Russia, not a near-peer competitor, but Iran,
operating with Russian and Chinese technical assistance, has been able to sustain operations at a pace and volume that stretched American defense systems to the point that equipment is being physically removed from the Korean peninsula to cover shortfalls in the Gulf. What does that tell Taiwan? What does that tell South Korea, which just watched its missile defense leave? What does that tell Australia, which has staked its long-term security on the AUKUS partnership and the assumption of American staying power in the Indo-Pacific? And what does it tell all of them when the U.S. Interior Secretary tells reporters with a straight face that Gulf state allies have never been happier with the American military presence in their country?
The United Arab Emirates had a skyscraper in Dubai's Creek Harbor district struck by an Iranian drone. That is not a country radiating happiness. That is a country in acute crisis, with its insurance markets in disarray, its sovereign wealth funds quietly stress-testing worst-case scenarios, and its leadership privately furious at not having been consulted before a war began on its doorstep. Now, I want to talk about a dimension of this that almost no mainstream analysis is touching, because there is a reason this conflict has gone the way it has gone, beyond just the technical specifications of drones and interceptors. The United States military did not enter this conflict at full operational readiness. It entered with a leadership structure that had been systematically reorganized under criteria that prioritized loyalty over operational experience. Multiple senior general officers and flag officers, individuals with decades of experience in exactly the theaters and against exactly the adversary type now being engaged, were displaced or retired in the weeks and months preceding this conflict. The consequence of that is not visible on a satellite image. It is not measurable in a missile count, but it is present in every operational decision, every targeting assessment, every escalation calculation made under fire in real time.
When you are executing a multi-front air and naval campaign against an adversary that has spent a decade hardening its command infrastructure, dispersing its missile production facilities underground, and testing its drone swarm tactics against Saudi and Emirati targets in lower-stakes engagements over years, the difference between experienced and inexperienced senior operational leadership is not marginal. It is potentially decisive. Let me walk you through the diplomatic dimension, because what happened in the hours before the strikes began is one of the most important and least reported parts of this entire story. Reporting from The Guardian, confirmed by diplomatic sources in both Europe and the Gulf region, indicates that just hours before the United States and Israel launched the initial strikes, Oman had brokered a framework for direct talks, a deal in principle. Special envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner had reportedly been in communication through Omani intermediaries. According to sources familiar with those back-channel negotiations, there was a genuine moment, a real window where a diplomatic off-ramp was available. And then that night, the strikes happened.
The Gulf state governments, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, were not warned. According to multiple regional outlets, these countries learned about the strikes the same way the rest of the world did, from news reports. They were not consulted. They were not asked whether they consented to a war being opened in their immediate neighborhood, a war that would inevitably draw Iranian retaliation against their infrastructure, their shipping lanes, their citizens. That is not how alliances function, and those leaders know it, and they will remember it. Not next week, not next month, for years, for decades. In every future negotiation about basing rights, about intelligence sharing, about force posture agreements, about the terms on which American power operates in their region. The cost of that decision, to strike without warning and without consultation, will be paid long after this conflict ends. Now let me take you to Europe, because the European dimension of this crisis is not getting the attention it deserves. Romania has authorized the United States to deploy aircraft and up to 500 troops to support operations, but Spain has explicitly refused the use of its territory and bases for any offensive action connected to strikes on Iran. The United Kingdom has drawn the same line. France has refused. Their reasoning is not ideological. It is mathematical.
Iran's missile arsenal has a range that comfortably covers southeastern Europe from Iranian territory. The distance from Tehran to Romania is under 2,500 kilometers. Geopolitical risk analysts, citing operational range data compiled from open-source missile databases, note that at least 6 identified Iranian missile variants can reach Romanian territory. Iran has not historically shied away from striking targets it considers complicit in attacks on its soil. Spain, France, and the United Kingdom have made a rational calculation. Do not make yourself a target for a conflict that is not yours to own. And that rational calculation, made independently by 3 major NATO members, is the quiet beginning of an unraveling of operational NATO cohesion. Not a formal split, not a dramatic public break, but a documented refusal filed in the record noted by every defense ministry on the planet that will shape the terms of every future NATO operational discussion. And then there is Russia. As reported across multiple outlets, the administration held a meeting in Florida with a Russian delegation alongside Jared Kushner and White House advisors. The meeting was described as productive. Russia, which by multiple intelligence assessments has provided Iran with critical electronic warfare systems, drone manufacturing expertise, and technical assistance for Shahed production scaling, is apparently a productive interlocutor right now.
If you are Volodymyr Zelensky, watching Russia operate a proxy second front against Western interests in the Middle East while pressing forward in Ukraine, and watching Washington engage warmly with Moscow's emissaries, you are experiencing the recognition that your primary partner has a decision-making process you cannot model or predict. That recognition is dangerous for everyone. I see 2 paths forward. I see no middle ground between them. I wish I did. Path 1. Someone in the relevant rooms chooses de-escalation. Oman has not walked away from its mediating role. Qatar still maintains operational channels to Tehran. Several European foreign ministers are privately urging a humanitarian pause as a face-saving entry point for both sides. In this scenario, some version of a temporary cessation occurs, a partial reopening of the Strait of Hormuz under international monitoring, a recognition by both Washington and Tehran that the stated objectives cannot be achieved at a cost either side is willing to pay indefinitely. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, who by all credible accounts is significantly more hard-line than his father, whose entire formative experience was within the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and who watched this war begin while his father lay dying, may calculate that a partial victory now is preferable to total war with existential stakes. That is the bet that Path 1 requires.
Oil prices stabilize at a higher plateau. The world reorganizes around a new multipolar reality. Nobody gets everything they wanted. Everyone survives. Path 2. There is no de-escalation mechanism both sides can accept publicly. Iran carries out its stated intention to bring the Red Sea into the conflict via the Houthis, closing the alternate global shipping route. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested. Oil reaches levels that trigger recessionary conditions in European economies already operating on minimal buffer. Asian supply chains face structural disruption that cannot be resolved short-term. The American military continues to deplete expensive interceptor inventories against cheap drone swarms. Domestic political pressure in the United States intensifies. And at some point, some actor, potentially a proxy, not necessarily a state actor, escalates in a way that cannot be walked back. Based on everything I am seeing, the UK MTO data, the Israeli casualty reports, the THAAD redeployment, Kim Jong-un's cruise missile test, the Gulf State fury, the European refusals, the Iranian doctrine statement, I think we are closer to Path 2 than Washington wants you to believe. I say that not to frighten you. I say it because you deserve accurate information. Let me give you the numbers that cut through the official narrative. Not from Al Jazeera, not from Iranian state media.
The Jerusalem Post, one of Israel's flagship newspapers, reported the following after 11 days of fighting. Israel had received 9,115 missile damage claims, 6,586 buildings damaged or destroyed, nearly 1,000 pieces of critical infrastructure equipment damaged, almost 1,500 vehicles destroyed or damaged, northern Israel under continuous bombardment. Iran opened 8 simultaneous operational fronts, and Iran's own leadership remains largely intact. That last line is not a daily brief assessment. It is the conclusion of American intelligence professionals whose assessments have been shared with congressional oversight committees and reported by the Washington Post. The UK Maritime Trade Operations Office is telling you shipping attacks are increasing, not decreasing. The oil market is telling you stable supply is not expected. 3 ships were struck in the last 24 hours. A skyscraper in Dubai was hit by an Iranian drone. South Korea's THAAD batteries are on transport planes heading to the Gulf. Kim Jong-un is launching cruise missiles from a destroyer and posting the footage. NATO allies are publicly refusing to host offensive operations. You are an adult. You can triangulate. Let me close with the questions that define what happens next, because the answers to these questions will shape the world your children inherit.
Is Mojtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader of Iran, who spent his entire career inside the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, who watched this war begin while his father was dying, is he the kind of leader who responds to sustained military pressure by moderating? Or is he the kind of leader who interprets every American strike as confirmation that escalation is the only viable posture? The honest answer from Western intelligence right now is that they do not have high-confidence assessments of his decision calculus. That uncertainty alone, not knowing how the man at the top of the Iranian regime thinks under maximum pressure, is one of the most dangerous conditions in this entire situation. What happens in Asia in the next 90 days, as Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and Australia watch American interceptor systems leave their theater to cover shortfalls in the Gulf? At what point do these governments begin making genuinely independent security arrangements? What does indigenous defense procurement look like at that scale? And what does it do to Beijing's calculations about Taiwan? Because if Beijing's planners look at the last 12 days and conclude that the American security umbrella has demonstrated measurable limits, that is the most consequential strategic assessment made anywhere on Earth in decades. And the deepest question of all, when the dust settles, because eventually it will, who emerges stronger?
Iran, which has demonstrated operational reach and manufacturing resilience at a scale that surprised every Western assessment. Russia, which has used Iran as a proxy to bleed American resources and credibility without a single Russian weapon directly engaging a U.S. target. China, which has watched its primary strategic competitor exhaust both military inventory and alliance trust in a war it chose, without allied consultation, to start. Or is there a scenario, difficult to see right now but not impossible, in which the United States, chastened, reorganizes its strategic posture with genuine allied consultation, and emerges with a more realistic and ultimately more durable framework for global engagement? I do not have a clean answer to that, and anyone who tells you they do is selling you something. What I know is this: the world you are operating in today is not the same world it was 3 weeks ago. The architecture has shifted. The calculations of every government, every military planner, every sovereign wealth fund, every shipping insurer, every energy trader on the planet have been permanently updated. And the people responsible for protecting ordinary citizens in every country that organized its security around American power are running those updated numbers tonight. Subscribe to Daily Brief. Turn on notifications. We are on this every single day, because this is moving faster than any single news cycle can track.
And the implications for your energy costs, for your investment portfolio, for the security architecture that every democratic country on Earth depends on are not abstract. They are arriving, right now, in your prices, in your markets, in the decisions being made in defense ministries and foreign policy offices around the world tonight. Leave your answer in the comments right now. What do you think happens in the next 30 days? Does this de-escalate or escalate? Do Gulf state allies hold together,
Or do we see the first public break in that coalition before April? And the bigger question, the one I keep coming back to, when the historians write the chapter about these weeks, what will they say was the moment the world changed? I read every single comment, every one. This community is how Daily Brief stays honest. Your perspective, your questions, your pushback keeps this analysis sharp. Share this video with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening.